I've been across this country and I've met with many mothers who are losing their children to your policing.
Winnipeg police officers hit and killed a First Nation woman Monday night while driving a cruiser in a local splash pad park near downtown.
33-year-old Stephen Iggy Didam was shot by an RCMP officer during a wellness check last Sunday night at his home in El Subotuk First Nation, about 160 kilometers northwest of Fredericton.
A video uploaded to social media appears to show a confrontation between police and Joshua and Garnet Pipagatuk, where 2 shots are heard. A Nunavut police officer allegedly shot the twins in the early hours of Monday morning around 4 a.m. in Saluit, Nunavut.
How many more of our people have to die at the hands of your police? Mothers are tired of burying their children.
Every day I wake up knowing that I'm never, ever gonna see my son or talk to him. And his last words were, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die. They killed my boy."
In a unanimous vote at the AFN on Tuesday, chiefs are calling for the federal government of Canada to launch a national inquiry to look into these deaths.
The horrendous deaths that have occurred in the Indigenous community over the past week has been a reminder that while we may at times see justice, we continue to not see institutions change.
Chief Mountain. It towers over the prairies and foothills that sweep across southern Alberta. For the Blackfoot people here on the homeland of the Blood Tribe, this view means your home. With over 300,000 acres of land, it's a reserve with deep roots in agriculture and rodeo. But this tight-knit community is in mourning after the loss of one of their best-known steer wrestlers.
Steer by the horns, just like that. Oh, John! Wow. What a way to...
I participated in the steer wrestling event and...
In September 2024, John Wells died after a police altercation in Calgary.
These are really old pictures way back when he was just, I don't remember how old he's, no, that was, this is him and his friend. He really worked out too, especially when he was in steer wrestling.
For John Wells, rodeo was a way of life. He was president of the Blood Tribe Agricultural Society and created Isuwu Open Circle, a horse therapy program for those struggling with addictions.
He was really kind, gentle, patient, understanding, silly guy, and he knew how to make you laugh.
His mom, Edith Wells, is left fighting for justice while reeling from the loss of her son.
One of the biggest things I miss about my son was his texting and calling. It's the hardest thing to deal with now.
She last heard from him on the night of September 16.
I got up that morning, next thing the phone rang. And I said, "Hello? This is the tactic team from Calgary." And the first person I thought it was my son. I said, "Where's John? Is John okay? Where is he?" And he just said, "I'm sorry to tell you, your son is not coming home. So he's not coming home."
APTN News has confirmed that a 7th Indigenous person has died during an interaction with police in the last 2.5 weeks. A family member says the man is 42-year-old John Wells, a member of the Blood Tribe south of Calgary.
Calgary police responded to a call which reported a man was causing a disturbance at the Carriage Hotel, refusing to leave. According to the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, officers tackled, punched, and deployed a taser on him. John was unarmed and told police, "I don't want to die." Emergency responders arrived and injected him with a sedative while handcuffed and restrained with a spit mask. Minutes later, he was noted as unresponsive and declared dead at the scene.
What they did to him was okay. His face wasn't the same when I seen him. This head was all big and bruised. They shouldn't have did that to him.
John was one of many Indigenous people killed in police-related incidents in the final months of 2024. From August 30th to December 14th, 15 weeks, 15 Indigenous people were killed during interactions with police or while in custody of police forces across the country. Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the Canadian population, but account for 16% of police-involved deaths, like 15-year-old Hoss Lightning Saddleback, who was shot and killed by RCMP in Wetaskiwin, Alberta.
We had a really close relationship. You have relationships with all your grandchildren, your children, but I always thought that Hoss's and mine were special because he was such an outgoing kid. He was so gentle and he would call me a lot, and I miss that. I really miss that part.
The restaurant where we're meeting Hoss's cookum, Natalie Lightning, is right across the street from where it all happened.
For him to be taken the way he was it was so hard. It was so hard on me. I couldn't believe that somebody could do that to another person. A child, he was still a child to me.
On August 30th, Hoss Lightning Saddleback called Wetaskiwin RCMP for help. He told a dispatcher he was being followed by people trying to kill him. Police said officers found him with several weapons, which they all confiscated. A police report states a confrontation led to 2 officers shooting Hoss, and he died in hospital. Months have passed, but Natalie says she's still trying to come to terms with what happened.
I still try to comprehend, what did Hoss do that was so criminal? Him calling the police for help was something I blame myself. I always used to tell the kids, never see trouble, or if you're in trouble, you're scared, you dial 911.
Like the case of John Wells, the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team is still investigating Hoss's death.
I think it has to be mandatory to take some kind of cultural sensitivity training.
APTN Investigates reached out to every police organization involved in the 15 deaths to ask what are the cultural training practices. RCMP, Ontario Provincial Police, Calgary Police, Nunavik Police, and Winnipeg Police all have a mandatory seminar to introduce its members to Indigenous issues and cultural needs. Windsor Police didn't respond to our request. But former RCMP officer Chad Haggerty says it takes more than cultural training.
You can write policy that says not to be racist or to treat people with respect. But if the culture of the organization runs contrary to policy, policy is not going to win.
Chad is Métis from East Prairie, Alberta. He's a criminal defense lawyer at his own firm in Calgary. Before that, he was an RCMP constable for 15 years.
As is obvious, I'm white passing. So when I joined the RCMP, not a lot of people knew I was actually Indigenous, that my first language when I was growing up was Cree. What that meant was when police officers were talking about dealing with Indigenous people, there often wasn't a filter around me. I looked like just another white guy. I talked like just another white guy. And they talked very freely about Indigenous people, and often it was very negative.
A negative atmosphere that could easily influence even an Indigenous officer.
There was a great deal of anti-Indigenous racism in the RCMP that was expressed in things like seeing a vehicle from the reserve and calling it a bingo stop, meaning that you would find warrants, you would find traffic tickets, you would find suspended drivers. And that was accepted and believed.
The strained relationship between police and Indigenous people in Canada has been marked by systemic discrimination, stemming from RCMP involvement in residential schools and colonization.
Indigenous people in Canada are generationally traumatized people by virtue of the policies of the Canadian government. That's been acknowledged. That is fact. Police officers are traumatized people. And when you put those two groups together, something bad happening isn't a possibility, it's a near certainty. Everything that I'm hearing tells me that the culture of the RCMP has not dramatically shifted, that police officers in the RCMP today are dealing with the same racism and internal systemic barriers that I dealt with 15 years ago. The negative interactions between police and Indigenous people in Canada has been so ridiculously disproportionate that it ought to be declared a state of emergency. As an Indigenous person, it scares the heck out of me.
Being a mother, knowing what my child went through, that is devastating. You know, my son is not just a nobody. He was somebody. He had a lot of dreams. He had a lot of accomplishments and a lot of goals he wanted to accomplish. He had a family. He had children. He had the community. He had a life. This is not going to go lightly. I am going to make sure justice is served. I am going to make sure my son, justice is served. We've been here longer than anybody. Our ancestors have been here longer than us. They lived this land. They roamed with the buffaloes. And that's why we're really resilient.
This is the first free-roaming bison herd to live on the Blood Tribe for generations, and John Wells played a role in their return to this land. Now it's a constant reminder of his absence.
The police need to go for more training. They need to understand us. us Native people, who we are. Why are we on the streets? Why are we in so much in these shelters? They need to know what they did and how they can correct stuff. I am just so hurt, devastated.
In early December, Edith took those concerns to Ottawa at the Assembly of First Nations.
Every day I wake up knowing that I'm never, ever going to see my son or talk to him. And his last words were, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. They killed my boy.
She joined other mothers and Grand Chief Cindy Woodhouse to call on the federal government for a national inquiry into systemic racism in policing.
If an inquiry were to happen now, and it doesn't say that there are systemic racist practices amongst police officers, then that inquiry was a waste of money.
In the 90s, the reason why we started as a police service was because of an inquiry.
The Blood Tribe Police is one of the oldest First Nations police services in Canada. Operating for 35 years, it employs 33 officers, like Constable Charity Poole.
Control from off 2. Mental health is very prominent for First Nations. That's when police get called, is those high stress moments, and you never know what you're walking into sometimes.
There's 15 deaths now across Canada since end of August. What has kind of come out of those conversations?
The biggest thing that's come out of those conversations is training and how we are different for Blood Tribe Police Service and where we focus our needs.
To this day, the force hasn't been a part of an officer-involved shooting or death. Poole says it comes down to training and de-escalation tactics.
Training is the best thing in scenario-based and understanding mental health. You de-escalate because our biggest tool is our words, how we speak to people.
You'd have to be completely oblivious to not say there isn't systemic racism within any police service.
Police Chief Grant Buckskin is also a citizen of the Blood Tribe.
When something like this happens, it's not just one police service, it's everybody across the board. I mean, a perfect example was George Floyd. When that unfortunate incident occurred, all police officers across North America were all put under a microscope even more. You have to foster and build strong relationships in the communities, and they need to be sustained and sincere, not just something that is part of your strategic plan. I'm not being critical of any one police service or law enforcement agency. I think it's just as a whole, we all need to do that.
Chad Haggerty left the RCMP in 2011, but frequently speaks with current members.
I've asked recently, in the last couple of months, about any training related to Indigenous culture, Indigenous people. And the response that I've gotten is that it's surface level, it's self-directed, and that if you want, you can skip through it in a few minutes and not really take anything from it.
A complete overhaul of an organization is not something that happens inside of just a few years. It doesn't happen in months, it doesn't happen in weeks. These are things that must occur over generations of police officers.
In Calgary, police have an Indigenous relations team. It was created to build a better relationship with the Indigenous community.
There's been circumstances over a number of years that have impacted that, sometimes in a negative way, and there's been a broad number of instances that have furthered trust and confidence that the community has with us.
Inspector Travis Druska can't speak about the John Wells case as it's under investigation, but he says Calgary Police launched mandatory Indigenous education and training modules. They reflect the history of residential schools, the 60s scoop, and how it's impacted the history of Indigenous policing.
When you talk about things like racial equity, you're really talking about changes in mindset. You're talking about convincing the officers who have the privilege of serving the public that they must embrace a certain way of thinking.
It's going to be hard being there and knowing that he's not going to be there and not seeing him participate. That's the hardest. It's going to hurt.
The Blood Tribe Agriplex. This was John Wells' second home. And it's Edith's first time here since his death. This is where John practiced, taught youth how to steer wrestle, and held his healing programs.
He should still be here, living his dreams, his goals. Because what they did to him wasn't okay. They shouldn't have done what they did to him.
I'd like to thank the Blood Tribe and the community for their support in rodeo as well. And I encourage the community of the Blood Tribe to come out and support your local cowboys and cowgirls. And good luck to all my fellow cowboys and contestants. God bless.
There's a lot of people that love him. And we are going to make justice happen.